A school bully attacks a quiet black girl, not knowing she's Jason Statham's adopted daughter. What happens next shocks the entire school and the internet. Stay to the end to see how Jason teaches this bully a lesson he'll never forget. Like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what you think of this powerful, true-to-life story. It was a cold Wednesday morning in the heart of London when Amara stepped off the sleek black Range Rover that dropped her off at the gates of Ashbourne Academy, a prestigious private school nestled in the suburbs. The overcast sky hung low, and there was a bite in the air that made her tighten the straps of her backpack and hug her arms close to her body. Her boots crunched over the frosted path as she walked toward the tall glass doors, her heart hammering like it did every morning. She was used to the glances, the curious stares from the other students who still hadn't fully accepted her. Not because she was new, not because she was brilliant, though she was, but because she was different. She was black, adopted, and quiet in a sea of loud, wealthy, white teenagers who measured worth by who your parents were, how many followers you had on social media, and whether you arrived at school in a Tesla or a helicopter. And Amara had none of that, or so they thought. Jason Statham had raised her to value things most people had forgotten: dignity, humility, perseverance. He had adopted her when she was just 6, after a mission in Sierra Leone had left him face-to-face with a tiny girl hiding behind a broken shack, clutching the lifeless body of her brother. He never talked about that mission, never spoke of what he had seen, but he never forgot the way her eyes looked up at him, terrified, angry, yet defiant. That defiance reminded him of himself. Without hesitation, he brought her home. He gave her a life that neither money nor fame could ever fully replace. And most importantly, he gave her love, protection, and the kind of guidance only someone who had walked through fire could provide. But Amara never wanted people to know who her father was. She wanted to build her identity outside of his name. So when she enrolled at Ashbourne under her mother's maiden name, Statham respected her choice. Amara kept to herself mostly. She read poetry during lunch, sat at the back in class, and always offered a polite smile when spoken to. But some people didn't like silence, especially not kids like Leo Stanton. Leo was the type of boy you only see in movies, the rich kid whose father owned a string of hedge funds and drove a McLaren to golf practice. He had the charisma of a born showman and the cruelty of a lion that had never been tamed. Everyone either wanted to be him or be liked by him. His voice carried through hallways, and his smirk could shred egos in seconds. He was the king of Ashbourne, and he didn't like anomalies in his kingdom. At first, Leo ignored Amara, but as weeks turned to months and she didn't respond to his sarcasm, didn't laugh at his jokes, didn't show awe at his expensive sneakers, he began to see her as a threat. Not because she was trying to compete, but because her quiet dignity made his noise seem empty. And that, to someone like Leo, was intolerable. So he began testing her. Little things. Tripping her in the hallway when no one was looking. Slipping notes in her locker that said things like, "Know your place, or you'll never fit in." One time, he snatched her sketchbook when she left it on the bench during PE, tore out a charcoal drawing of her late brother, and held it up for everyone to see. "Who is this? Your African prince?" He had laughed, the crowd around him chuckling like hyenas. Amara's hands trembled that day, but she said nothing. She simply walked over, took the drawing back, now crumpled and torn to the corner, and walked away. Jason had always told her, "Don't waste energy proving yourself to cowards. You show them who you are through your actions." And so she did. But Leo saw her silence as weakness, and weakness to a bully is fuel. It was a Tuesday when everything came to a boiling point. The day started like any other. Amara arrived early, stopped by the art room to drop off a canvas she'd been working on, and made her way to first period. But by lunch, the corridors buzzed with something unusual. Whispers followed her. Snickers. Eyes that darted away when she looked up. Then she saw it. On the large projector screen in the main hallway, the one usually used to show school announcements, there was a picture of her. A doctored image. Her face, photoshopped onto a jungle scene with primitive-looking cartoon characters around her and a bold caption at the bottom. "Queen of the Jungle. coming soon to a zoo near you. Amara froze. Her stomach twisted as laughter echoed through the building. A group of boys gathered near the lockers, high-fiving each other, while Leo leaned against a wall with his phone out, capturing it all. When their eyes met, he smiled. A slow, mocking grin. Just a bit of fun, Jungle Girl. Don't get so emotional, he said, his voice oily with sarcasm. For the first time, Amara felt tears sting the back of her eyes. Not because of the picture. She had endured worse. But because she could hear her father's voice in her head, calm and strong. There will come a day when someone crosses the line, and when that happens, you don't stoop to their level. You rise so high above it that the whole world takes notice. So she didn't lash out. She didn't scream. She walked up to the screen, pulled out her phone, recorded the image, turned to Leo, and said just one thing. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. Leo laughed even harder. Or what? Your imaginary dad going to come beat me up? She said nothing. Just walked out. What Leo didn't know, and what none of the kids at Ashbourne had realized, was that every day at 4 p.m., Jason Statham would sit in his black SUV a few streets away, hidden behind tinted windows, watching as Amara walked out of school. He never made a scene, never imposed himself, but he watched every single day. And on that Tuesday, when she got into the car with her face pale and her hands clenched so tight her knuckles turned white, he knew something was wrong. She didn't speak until they were nearly home. Then, in a quiet voice, she showed him the video. Jason didn't say a word for a full minute. His jaw clenched, his eyes unreadable. Then, softly, he said, "And how did you respond?" I told him he made the biggest mistake of his life. Jason nodded. Then let's make sure he never forgets it. The next morning, Amara stayed home. Jason told her he had a plan, and she trusted him. At exactly 10:45 a.m., the same time Leo usually strutted through the courtyard after second period, a black Range Rover pulled into the school parking lot and a man stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit, no sunglasses, no entourage, just jeans, a fitted black t-shirt, and a stare that could stop a lion mid-charge. Jason walked straight through the gates, past the receptionist who froze in mid-sentence, and headed toward the courtyard. Within seconds, students started pulling out their phones. Murmurs rippled through the halls. Some recognized him instantly. Others simply whispered, "Is that?" Leo was leaning against the marble fountain, flanked by two of his cronies, when he looked up and saw the man walking toward him. His smirk faltered. Jason stopped 3 feet away. "Leo Stanton?" Leo straightened. Yeah." Jason didn't raise his voice, didn't move a muscle. He simply looked at the boy with eyes that had seen war, loss, and redemption. "You humiliated my daughter." Leo blinked. "Wait, what?" "She told you yesterday," Jason continued, his voice steady. "She warned you. You didn't listen. So now I'm here to teach you something your parents clearly never did." Leo's laugh was nervous. "Mate, it was a joke. A meme. Chill out." Jason took a slow step forward. "You think racism is a joke? You think making a girl question her worth is funny? Let me explain something to you, Leo. Life has a way of teaching hard lessons. You either learn them with wisdom or pain." And with that, the atmosphere changed. Phones recorded. Gasps echoed. But what happened next wasn't violence. Jason didn't lift a finger. Instead, he turned to the growing crowd and said, with that same calm thunder in his voice, "Let me tell you who Amara is. Not because she asked me to. In fact, she told me not to. But because silence, in the face of ignorance, only lets darkness grow. So you're going to hear this. Every single one of you." He stepped up onto the edge of the marble fountain, his silhouette sharp against the dull sky, commanding the kind of attention that not even the headmaster could demand when delivering news of canceled holidays. "Amara is my daughter. Not by blood. By choice. I met her when she was 6, standing barefoot on soil cracked by war, her parents gone, her brother's blood drying on her clothes. And in that moment, she looked at me with a courage I've never seen in men twice my age. I brought her home, gave her a name, a roof, a future. But I didn't give her strength. She already had that. What I gave her was a chance. And she's honored it every single day." His voice dropped low, more intense. She chose this school because she believed she could grow here, that maybe, just maybe, people would look past her skin and see her soul. But what did she get? Hate dressed as humor, cowardice disguised as confidence. And who led it all? He turned his gaze on Leo, who now looked like he wanted to melt into the ground. A boy who's never seen anything beyond his own reflection. Leo swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. Look, I didn't know. Exactly, Jason cut in. You didn't know. You didn't care. And you thought no one would stand up for her. That's the thing about people like you, Leo. You think decency is weakness. You think silence means surrender. But you never stop to ask what happens when that silence has teeth. He stepped down from the fountain slowly, walked to within inches of the boy, and said, "You may not fear consequences, but you will remember this lesson. Not because I'm here to threaten you, but because everyone watching will." Jason turned to the students around him and said, "Every one of you who laughed yesterday, who shared that image, who didn't say a word while Leo acted like a dictator of cruelty, you're not innocent either. You're part of the same rot. And one day, when life hits you with something real, you'll realize that mocking someone who's different says nothing about them and everything about you." The silence in the courtyard was so thick, it was almost suffocating. Phones trembled in hands. No one dared move. Then Jason pointed at the screen, still playing images in the hallway. "You think that's funny? I think it's cowardice. I think it's the last gasp of a generation raised on cheap likes and empty applause. But my daughter, she's not like you. She's made of stronger stuff. And someday, when the world really falls apart, it won't be the Leos who put it back together. It'll be the Amaras." At that moment, the headmaster burst through the doors, his face flushed, eyes darting from Jason to the stunned crowd. "Mr. Statham, please, we could have handled this internally." Jason turned to him. "Handled it? You allowed a racist image of a student to be projected on a public screen in your hallways. And you didn't even call her parents? You failed her. And now you want to pretend this is under control? No. This school teaches maths, science, Latin, but clearly not a damn thing about character. So let me do your job for you." He turned back to Leo, now shaking slightly, hands clenching and unclenching as if he couldn't decide between defending himself or running. "You want to know how to fix this, Leo? Apologize. Not just to Amara, but to every kid you've ever mocked for being different. Because the road you're on, it leads to loneliness, emptiness, and regret. I met men like you at 50, broken, bitter, wondering why no one stuck around. This is your moment to choose something better." Leo's lips parted. For a second, the smugness flickered back. Then it died completely. His eyes fell, and he muttered, "I'm sorry." But Jason didn't let him off that easy. "Louder," he said. Leo looked up, his voice trembling now. "I'm sorry, Amara. I was wrong. It was disgusting. I didn't mean—" He stopped himself. "No, I meant it then. But I know now it was cruel." Jason gave a small nod. "You don't get points for remorse after you've been exposed. The real test starts now." The headmaster tried again. "Mr. Statham, this is highly irregular. I must insist." Jason walked past him. "You'll hear from a school board. And from me. But right now I've said what I needed to." He walked out of the courtyard as quietly as he had come, past students whose jaws still hung open, whose worlds had just been shaken in the most unexpected way possible. Some of them would go home that night and delete their social media posts. Others would sit in silence, questioning the way they'd treated kids who didn't fit in. And some, just a few, would begin the slow work of changing who they were. Meanwhile, at home, Amara sat at the window, having watched the whole thing from her phone. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from pride. She hadn't wanted her father to step in. But watching him stand there, telling her story to the world, she realized something. This wasn't about being rescued. This was about being seen. Later that evening, Jason walked through the door, and before he could say a word, Amara ran to him and hugged him tight. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she whispered, "You didn't have to do that." Jason pulled back, looked her in the eyes, and said, "You didn't have to face them alone either. But you did, and now they know exactly who they messed with." That night, a video of the confrontation went viral. Not because of Jason's fame, but because of the way he spoke. The way he refused to use violence when he easily could have. The way he stood tall, not as an action hero, but as a father, one who'd teach the world that dignity isn't inherited, it's chosen. The next morning, Leo didn't come to school. But the whispers were different now. They weren't about Amara. They were about courage, about truth, about a girl who stood tall when others tried to break her. And slowly, something began to shift. In the days that followed, students who had ignored Amara began to sit beside her. Teachers spoke of respect in a way they hadn't before. A few kids even apologized, not because they were told to, but because they'd seen what accountability looked like. But something was still coming. Something neither Leo, nor the school, nor even Jason himself could anticipate. Because while the confrontation had ended, the lesson, the real lesson, had only just begun. The days that followed the incident at Ashbourne Academy felt like the eye of a storm. Calm on the surface, but brimming with pressure underneath. The video of Jason Statham calling out Leo Stanton had traveled far beyond the school walls. News outlets caught wind of it. Social media lit up with hashtags like #StathamSpeaks and #StandWithAmara. And overnight, the entire country seemed to be talking about a girl who once sat alone in the back of the classroom and the father who turned silence into a roar. But Amara, even with the spotlight now trailing her steps, never changed her stride. She didn't bask in the sudden attention, nor did she gloat. Instead, she walked the same hallways with the same quiet dignity, her books held close, her eyes steady, and her resolve stronger than ever. But not everyone saw her rise as a victory. Some saw it as an opportunity for revenge. Leo Stanton had been humiliated. He hadn't just been embarrassed. He had been dismantled in front of the entire school, his parents, and now the whole internet. His father, a cold, ruthless man obsessed with optics, had been furious, not over Leo's actions, but over the PR nightmare they had caused. Sponsors pulled out of events tied to the Stanton Foundation. The headmaster of Ashbourne received a not-so-polite letter demanding Leo be vindicated in some way, or the Stanton family would reconsider their generosity toward the school's funding. Leo, pushed by his father's wrath and his own boiling resentment, decided he wouldn't let this go. He wanted his power back, and he thought he found a way to get it. Amara was invited to speak at a youth leadership conference the following weekend. Not because of who her father was, but because of how she had handled the hate, how she had stood still while the world tried to push her over, and how she had inspired thousands of young girls online to speak up in their own classrooms. She was hesitant at first, but Jason encouraged her. "The best revenge is showing them you're unbreakable," he said. And so she agreed. The event was being held at a large university hall, filled with students, teachers, community leaders, and influencers. Jason sat quietly in the audience, wearing a dark jacket and cap, trying to keep a low profile so that all eyes would remain where they belonged, on her. Amara stepped onto the stage with her notes in her hand and nerves racing through her veins. But the moment she spoke, her voice carried like a song of strength. "I didn't ask to be the center of attention," she said. "But maybe that's exactly why I need to be here. Because for too long, people like me have been told to stay quiet. And I want to say, to every kid who's been made to feel like they don't belong, your worth isn't up for debate. Not now, not ever." The room erupted in applause. Jason's eyes glistened, though he never let a tear fall. But in the shadows near the back, Leo Stanton watched with clenched fists. He had managed to sneak in with a fake press pass, armed with a camera crew hired by one of his father's companies. His plan wasn't physical. He wasn't stupid enough to try that again, not with half the internet watching. But he had something else in mind, something he believed would shatter Amara from the inside. He waited until the panel concluded, as Amara stepped down from the stage and made her way through the lobby with other speakers. Leo intercepted her path. A sudden hush fell over the room as people recognized him. The tension returned instantly, like a fire reigniting. Jason, standing only a few feet away, stopped in his tracks, his body tense, but his face unreadable. Leo raised his voice just enough to be heard by the cameras nearby. "Amara, I've been doing some thinking," he said, fake sincerity dripping from his tongue. And I think maybe it's time people knew the whole truth. Amara stared at him. What truth? Leo pulled a phone from his pocket and tapped on the screen. The truth about your father. About how he's used you as a prop to look good. Did he ever tell you why he was in Sierra Leone in the first place? Or what he did there before he found you? He looked around, baiting the audience. No. Guess that doesn't fit into the inspirational narrative, does it? The crowd murmured. Jason stepped forward now, slowly. But Amara raised her hand, stopping him. Leo continued, now emboldened. I did some digging. Special ops records. Classified files. Turns out Jason Statham wasn't just there to help. He was part of something else. Something darker. Maybe if people knew the full story, maybe they wouldn't be so quick to make you a hero. Amara's face didn't falter. She stepped forward, close enough to Leo that their breath could be seen in the cold air between them. Her voice was calm, cutting. You spent all this time digging into my family's past, and you still don't get it, do you? Leo blinked, confused. She continued. You think the worst thing you can say about my father is that he had to do ugly things in an ugly place to protect innocent lives? You think that discredits him? No, that makes him human. And still, he came out of all that and chose to be a father. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. The room was dead silent now. Amara stepped back. If you want to talk about using people as props, maybe ask your dad how many press releases he's written about his charities while doing nothing. But Jason Statham? He doesn't need cameras. He doesn't need headlines. He shows up when it matters. He stood up for me when the world stayed seated. And if you think anything you just said will change that, then you're more lost than I thought. Leo tried to speak, but the crowd had turned. They saw through the performance. One by one, people began walking away from him. Some booed. Others simply looked at him like he was invisible. His crew, unsure whether to keep filming, lowered their equipment. Even they couldn't believe how badly it had backfired. Jason finally stepped beside his daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch, didn't waver. He looked Leo in the eyes one last time and said only this. Now you've seen what real strength looks like. As they turned to leave, Leo stood frozen, his face red with embarrassment, but his mind spiraling with something more dangerous, desperation. Because now he wasn't just humiliated, he was irrelevant. And that, to someone like Leo, was the deepest cut of all. Outside the hall, Jason and Amara walked in silence for a few minutes before she finally spoke. Was what he said true? She asked, not with doubt, but with the courage of someone who could handle the answer. Jason nodded slowly. Yes, I've done things. Things I'll never be proud of. But the thing I'm proudest of is you. She stopped, turned to face him, and wrapped her arms around his waist. Then none of the rest matters. But back at the Stanton estate, Leo's father was watching everything unfold on the news, his face grim, his hand clutching a tumbler of scotch. We don't lose, he muttered to himself. Not to them. What came next would shake Ashbourne Academy and the entire city in a way no one expected. Because Leo wasn't done. And this time, his revenge wouldn't come through words or rumors. The Monday after the conference arrived cloaked in a deceptive calm, like a sky too still before a storm. Amara, having found a new sense of strength, returned to Ashbourne Academy with her head held high. The air around her had shifted. People greeted her with nods, some with soft smiles, and others with unspoken apologies. She hadn't just survived, she had changed the atmosphere of the school. Jason had driven her to school that morning, but didn't walk her in. He didn't need it anymore. Amara was no longer the invisible girl with downcast eyes. She had become a symbol of courage, and courage walks alone when it must. But in the shadows, in the quiet corridors, and behind the locked doors of the faculty offices, something was brewing. Something far more sinister than hallway bullying or stage confrontations. Leo Stanton had disappeared from school for a few days, officially under personal review. But in truth, he had been meeting with people who could dig deeper than high school gossip. People who specialized in manipulation, public scandal, and character assassination. Leo's father, Douglas Stanton, had made a few phone calls. One of them was to a private intelligence firm he had on retainer. a group that prided itself on being able to ruin reputations without ever leaving fingerprints. They weren't hackers per se. No, they were far more refined. They manufactured narratives, bent public perception, and manipulated the truth just enough to weaponize it. And their next target wasn't Amara. It was Jason. Late Wednesday night, a story broke on a fringe blog that Jason Statham had once been investigated by an international tribunal for actions during his special operations tenure. The piece was light on facts but heavy on suggestion. Did Jason Statham really rescue a child in Africa? Or was it something else? It was the kind of headline that didn't need to be true to do damage. The seed of doubt was enough. Within hours, the article was picked up by conspiracy channels, then Twitter, and soon after, by daytime talk shows looking for controversy to chew on. Hashtags like #StathamScandal and #HeroOrVillain began trending. Jason said nothing publicly. Not at first. He told Amara not to worry, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, the quiet fury of a man whose past, no matter how complicated, was now being twisted into ammunition against his daughter. At school, some students began to whisper again, not with malice, but with confusion. Teachers exchanged nervous glances. The headmaster, still under pressure from the Stanton's legal team, held a quiet meeting to review the potential impact of recent media attention on the academic environment. Amara, walking into the library one afternoon, overheard two boys at the back table say, "What if it's true? What if her dad really did those things?" It stung, not because they doubted Jason, but because they did so without ever questioning why the story had emerged now, or who it benefited. That was the cruelty of rumor. It didn't need evidence, just repetition. Amara went home that day feeling a weight on her chest she hadn't felt in weeks. Jason was in the backyard, chopping firewood, something he only did when he needed to think. She walked out and stood beside him, arms crossed. "Why don't you say something?" she asked softly. Jason paused mid-swing. Because truth doesn't always need defense. Sometimes it just needs to survive long enough for the lies to exhaust themselves. But what if they don't? He set the axe down and looked at her. "Then we make the truth louder." That night, they sat together and recorded a video. Not for clout, not for likes, but for clarity. Jason spoke plainly. He didn't deny his past. He acknowledged the operations, the violence, the lives he had taken, and the lives he had saved. But he said something that struck the world harder than any headline. "I'm not proud of everything I've done, but I am proud of the man I chose to become, and the daughter I chose to raise. If that makes me a target, so be it." Amara spoke next, her voice steady. "The question isn't whether my father's past is spotless. The question is whether a man can come out of darkness and still choose light. My dad didn't save me from a war zone. He saved me from being forgotten." The video went live at midnight. By morning, it had 2 million views. By noon, 10. Celebrities, journalists, and soldiers who had served alongside Jason began posting in support. People who had once bought into the smear campaign began retracting their words. But the damage was already done at Ashbourne. Douglas Stanton, furious that the plan had backfired again, arranged for an emergency hearing with the school board. His argument? Jason's ongoing controversies and Amara's polarizing presence were distracting from the school's mission. It was thinly veiled elitism, and everyone knew it. But the board, spineless and seduced by Stanton donations, agreed to a review. Amara might be expelled, not for anything she did, but because she had dared to rise. When Jason received the notice, he didn't rage. He didn't storm into the school. Instead, he wrote a letter. Then he suited up, not in a tuxedo, not in something theatrical, just a simple black jacket, jeans, and boots. He walked into the school hearing that Friday morning with Amara beside him, her hand tucked in his. The room was full, board members, teachers, and even some students who had gotten wind of what was happening. Jason asked for just 10 minutes to speak. They gave him 5. He stood, faced the crowd, and said, "You're not just deciding whether my daughter stays at this school. You're deciding what this school stands for. If you punish her for surviving cruelty and rising above it, then you're telling every other student here to stay silent, to accept injustice, to never speak truth to power. He paused, then added, "If you expel her, we'll walk away. And we'll be fine. But you won't. You'll be the school that stood with a bully because his family signed the checks. And that stain doesn't wash off." A hush fell across the room. One of the student representatives, a senior named Callum who had never spoken publicly before, stood up. "If Amara leaves, I leave. And I know I'm not alone." 2 others stood with him. Then 4. Then 10. The board was stunned. The headmaster, his face pale and sweaty, leaned forward and whispered something to Stanton. Douglas stood abruptly, sneering. "You'll regret this." Jason turned to him, eyes calm, voice soft. "I already regret not doing this sooner." The board voted. Amara stayed. But Leo Stanton, once the untouchable golden boy, was quietly asked to withdraw from Ashbourne. The story spread like wildfire. Justice wasn't always loud, but when it came, it echoed. Outside the school, as the sun broke through the cloud for the first time in days, Jason and Amara stood beside the car. She looked up at him, her voice cracking. "You gave me your name, but today you gave me my future." Jason smiled, brushed a hand across her braided hair, and said, "No, love. You took your future. I just reminded them not to get in your way." And though it felt like the end of a battle, neither of them realized the final lesson hadn't yet come, because one last confrontation still waited in the shadows. And this time, it wouldn't be in a courtyard or a hearing. It would come face to face. Jason, Leo, one last time. It was a week after the hearing. Life at Ashbourne Academy had shifted like tectonic plates after a quake. The once unshakable hierarchy had been upended. Leo Stanton's name was no longer spoken with reverence, but with embarrassment. He had officially withdrawn from the school, but the truth was more public than ever. He'd been expelled, outwitted, and outshined by a girl he'd once called a nobody. And Amara? Amara became more than a student. She became a symbol, a movement, a quiet revolution. Students who once kept their heads down began speaking up. Assemblies were now held on inclusion, leadership, and digital ethics. And Jason, for the first time in a long while, felt peace when he dropped his daughter off at the school gates. But peace is never permanent when the past isn't finished with you. Jason received a message one night, a private, anonymous note delivered by hand to his gate. No return address, no signature, just a simple sheet of paper that read, "You took everything. Now come face what's left." And an address. The location was a shuttered warehouse on the edge of the city, an old shipping depot long since abandoned. Jason knew what this was. He didn't tell Amara. He didn't tell anyone, because some things he had to face alone. It was nearly midnight when he arrived. The warehouse loomed like a tomb, its rusted iron doors partially open, the wind moaning through the broken windows like ghosts whispering old names. Jason stepped inside, the crunch of gravel under his boots the only sound. And there, sitting on a metal crate with a bottle in his hand and rage in his eyes, was Leo Stanton. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was a mess, his clothes wrinkled, and the fake confidence he used to wear like armor was gone, peeled away to reveal the frightened, furious boy underneath. Jason didn't flinch. He simply said, "You wanted this. I'm here." Leo stood, tossing the bottle aside. "You ruined my life." "No," Jason replied, calm as ever. "You did that all on your own. I just held up the mirror." Leo's voice cracked. "You think you're better than me? You think being some washed-up soldier turned celebrity gives you the right to humiliate me?" Jason stepped closer. "No, but being a father gives me the right to protect my daughter. And you wouldn't just bully her. You tried to destroy her." "I was angry," Leo snapped. "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," Jason corrected. "And when that choice didn't break her, you tried to break the truth." Leo's fists clenched. "What do you want from me? You already won. She won. Everyone sees me as the villain." Jason didn't answer right away. He looked around the dusty room, then back at Leo. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to finish something." Leo scoffed. "There's nothing left to finish." Jason nodded. "That's where you're wrong. There's one more thing you haven't done. The only thing that might still save you." Leo raised his eyebrows. "And what's that? Apologize?" Again, Jason shook his head. Not to us. To yourself. You've been living in a lie so long. You can't even see how much you hate the person you've become. You don't need our forgiveness. You need your own. And until you find it, you'll always be chasing people like Amara. Try and tear them down because their strength reminds you of everything you lack. Leo's breath hitched, his bravado crumbling. You don't know me. I know pain when I see it, Jason said quietly. I know what it's like to be raised by a father who only cares about winning. I know what it does to a boy. Turns him into a shadow of the man he could have been. For a moment, silence. Just the two of them in the ruins of a place that matched the ruins inside Leo's heart. Then Jason turned to leave. You've got two choices, Leo. Keep hiding behind money and lies, or do something real for once. Maybe start by helping someone instead of hurting them. He walked out, leaving Leo alone with his thoughts. And for the first time in his life, Leo didn't feel powerful. He didn't feel angry. He felt small and free, because somewhere deep down, beneath all the bitterness, he knew Jason was right. The next morning, a letter arrived at Ashbourne Academy. It was addressed to the school community and signed by Leo Stanton. In it, he confessed everything, not just the bullying, but the manipulation, the media lies, the pressure from his father, and the self-hatred that drove it all. He apologized not with fanfare, but with humility. And he ended it with one line, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to begin again. The letter was published in the school's newsletter, then picked up by the media. But Amara didn't react with celebration. She read it once, folded it gently, and tucked it into her journal. When Jason asked how she felt, she said, I think he finally saw himself. Jason nodded. That's the beginning of everything. Months passed. The chaos faded. Amara graduated with honors, delivering the commencement speech to thunderous applause. She didn't talk about the bullying. She talked about hope, about rebuilding, about standing tall in the storm. And when she stepped off the stage, Jason was there, waiting, pride shining in his eyes like morning sun. Years later, Amara became a human rights lawyer, advocating for children in war-torn countries. The same kind of child she once was. She told her story only when it was needed. She wore her scars not as shame, but as proof that healing is possible. And through it all, Jason stood by her, never asking for credit, never needing the spotlight. Just a father watching his daughter rewrite the world. As for Leo, he vanished from the public eye, but there were whispers that he worked at a youth center in the East End, that he'd become a mentor to troubled boys, that he spoke openly about his mistakes and never used his father's money again. Redemption, like healing, takes time, but it begins with a choice. And Leo, because of one unforgettable man and one unbreakable girl, had made his. And that is the story of how a school bully attacked a black girl without knowing she was Jason Statham's daughter, and how Jason didn't just teach him a lesson. He taught an entire generation what real strength looks like. Not through fists, but through truth, courage, and love.